This is the time.
You have our ears.
Yeah. Can break the ice with some pre-questions.
I have a question.
Go for it, Gil.
What is CICD? We can actually do an introduction, you know, as long as we have the like 2 or 3 minutes. So shoot, let's see, because you know a lot of people define CI and CD differently. So let's try and define what we think of as CI/CD. Anybody want to start? I want to start with CI.
Go for it.
Go for it.
Okay, CI is continuous integration. That everybody agrees to. Okay, but from there on, it's all Wild West. My definition of CI is a system that enables you to always be integrated, so that there aren't any features that are developed separately somewhere, like for months or for weeks, and integrated only once every, who knows, like couple of weeks, couple of months, etc., etc. People conflate that with Jenkins, Circle CI, etc., but those are CI build systems. Those are enablers, and we're going to talk a lot about them. Those are enablers for continuous integration itself. It doesn't necessarily, if you want CI, if you want to continuously integrate, you don't have to have a build system, but it's a good thing to have. So CI is continuous integration. It's the development methodology where you constantly integrate into the master branch and not wait for weeks or months to integrate. How was I?
Now I have a question.
Yes, so I have my chef tools.
So, okay, you do continuous integration, but if you have like a big feature that does like breaking changes and you have to integrate with a third party, you're not able to do a continuous integration, like a merge every day or every couple of days.
Well, yes, you can. I mean, if you want to, you can do that, and there are ways to deal with that. The most efficient and known way is feature flags, and or simply if you're just doing backend, not breaking compatibility at all ever. Okay, so with those two, you can basically get around the problem of breaking compatibility. Either you just don't do it and you just add more and more stuff to your API, or if you want breaking changes, then you slowly integrate them using feature flags. Those are the two common ways. Maybe Liran and Yoni can think of others.
Yeah, I was going to say the classic one is a continuous integration, basically merging of code bases, right, between branches. I think that was the original intent of coining this term.
Yep.
It feels like many of the technologies, there is a big gap between where and why it started versus where it landed finally and evolving from now here. So yeah, it started like a famine to discover gaps between developers early and automatically.
Yep.
Kind of we won't find integration issues 2 weeks from now, rather every night. I'm referring to 10, 15 years ago. And now it seems like a very versatile workflow engine that spans the entire development process from start to end, including quality and UI and reports and, well, I'm putting aside CD, we're talking about CI. So it feels like the backing engine for the entire development.
True, but in essence, this is an enabler for the original purpose. I mean, we've built a lot of tooling around it, but the original purpose is continuously integrate into one master branch. All those tools, reports, and whatever are, from my point of view, enablers for the main branch.
Yeah. So an interesting question, is it indeed about integration? A few years ago, I saw a new definition of CI. Instead of integration, it's continuous inspection, in the sense that even if I develop alone, I don't know, some kind of a microservice or so, I would highly benefit, even though I don't need to integrate with no one, I would highly benefit from having this kind of robot guarding me during development. So is it still about integration?
Yes, definitely. For me, the important word is continuous and not integration. So the master branch always has working code. And whenever you do a change, you don't like wait for weeks until your change works, but you constantly integrate working code into your master branch, even if the feature isn't done. So yes, I worked for 9 months alone on the visual grid, and at Applitools, I did continuous integration. I feel like I did continuous integration.
Yeah.
CD? Or do we start with
If I can ask a question, you were all describing continuous integration, and all of your definitions did not include like any reference to testing, right? And whenever I hear or see or do continuous integration, it's mostly 90% making automated tests, right? So I'm wondering why
why are tests related, or
no, why the disconnect? I mean, if maybe it's not me, but if most of what we do with continuous integration is running automated tests, then I mean, shouldn't it be a bigger part of what defines continuous integration?
continuous
Definitely.
testing?
No, definitely. But if you're running your tests on long-running branches and not continuously integrating those branches into master, then you can be doing as many tests as you want. It's not continuous integration.
Yeah, I would take it.
That's my view of it.
Look at it maybe differently. So if continuous integration by the definition we agree on is basically merging code into master all the time in continuous fashion, you could basically do that with like 0 tests, right? The thing is, tests are the enabler here, right? It what keeps you safe at night, that, you know, whatever gets integrated is actually, you know, usable, right? Trustable, testable, whatever you want to define it as. So it's kind of like, it's what you do to make sure that whatever you integrate actually works, or, you know, per your definition of done, or what that is.
Yes. Sorry, Yoni.
No, I think that what Alon said makes tons of sense. It's mostly, I mean, the technique itself is mostly about testing, but recently there are so many new kind of tools and quality checks that it's just makes sense to generalize it. Like you can catch so many different things rather than logic bugs, from security to, you know, cosmetic linting things, and
right. But we're going to talk about that.
So, come again, Gil?
We're going to talk about that, I think, in one of the slides.
It's next week's, Gil. It's next week meetup session. All right, Daniel, do we want to kick it off? We're like at 11 minutes off.
Yeah, if you just want to say just a couple of words about CD, so we complete the
sure.
CICD. Sorry.
Let's finish that one off. Want to take it?
Okay, I'll take it. CD is continuous deployment, which means continuously deploy to production. The original version of continuous deployment was every commit to master after being tested just goes to production. That's definitely continuous. I think even when you're like doing a couple, we like deploy like 3, 4, 5 times a day at Applitools. But in essence, if you're deploying daily or deploying like 2 or 3 times a week, from my point of view, that's continuous deployment.
There's the other aspect of people referring also to CD as continuous delivery. And there's the difference there. You want to talk about it, Yoni?
The difference between delivery and deployment?
Yeah.
Actually, I don't.
It's always the same for you because you always deploy to master.
Exactly.
You want to emphasize the differences?
No, I was just saying, like, yeah, it's like just the nuance of there's also the delivery part, which is taking that code and delivering it to different systems. But when people talk about deployment, they usually refer specifically to like deploying that on production or some other system they refer to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Again, also, I think Gil absolutely defined the basic definition of it. And here again, there is a difference between where it started. It was kind of the execution phase post CI. Okay, now we are confident and we put it in production. And now it becomes a bit more sophisticated, and we will cover it. I will just touch on it very briefly. And now CD is also part of testing. The entire deployment phase is also additional kind of test that we want to conduct. Like we want what people used to call now testing in production. We want to do the deployment smart enough that it is gradually and deploying it in a safe way. So it also went a long way from that original definition to what it can do now.
I think we can start, right, Liran?
Yeah.
That's it. All right, so officially starting off, thank you all for joining Fruitful CI/CD practices. We managed to get those aprons here, and Gil has the tools. Gil showed them the tools. So he has some recipes for you. Gil's the chef, basically. We're just the sous chefs. And we have some practices rundown of like we thought what would be interesting to talk in terms of CI/CD trends, and also like best practices or bad practices, depending on how you look at it. So let's get started. I'll go ahead and skip the slides. So about the chefs, Yoni, do you want to introduce yourself shortly? You can just read off the text or.
Or actually, I don't see the slides. Let me check out why.
You don't see the slides.
Now I can.
Everyone see the slide? Okay, there we go.
Yeah. So my name is Yoni Goldberg. It's great to be here today. I'm an Node.js consultant, which means that the great part about it is that I can see more than a few different teams and use cases and technologies every year. It's a great opportunity for learning. And this is the food for what I really enjoy doing, which is writing about it in my blog and speaking about it. And among all of these topics, I think that what I enjoy even more is talking about testing. So I feel like I'm in the right place now. And it's great to be with all of you here today.
I'm Gil. I'm a senior architect, whatever that means, at Applitools. I'm a developer, basically, who also built and architected whatever needs to be done. Applitools does visual testing, so I built a visual grid, and a grid of like thousands of machines running Chrome and Firefox and Safari and whatever. All my life, I've been a developer, developed stuff. Lots of practice with CICD, basically from around 2000, when it wasn't even called that. And I co-founded WebCollage, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there we go. That is who I am. Liran, save me.
Yeah, so I'm a developer advocate. That's a big definition, so I won't go through that. And if you are interested, we can touch it at the end. At Sneak, where we build developer-friendly security tools. Beyond that, I'm just generally active on the Node community, JavaScript, front-end, security, all of those areas. So I'll probably jump off straight after that and go into the CICD recipes as we are short on time. So first off, the first recipe we're going to start with is going to be, Gil, do you want to take this one off? 2020 CICD, what does that mean versus old, and what's awaiting for us in the future besides COVID-19 vaccine?
Yeah, I've been doing CICD for a long time. So in a way, 2015, I think I was at Wix. They are very advanced in that area. It was very similar to what I'm doing now, but very different. And I'll point and highlight the differences. First of all, Wix, everything was hand-built. There were no CI toolings. We did CI, always no long-running branches, always integrating to master. We basically pushed to master. I have never done the branches thing, push to master. And then we had the CI tool based on SteamCity that built everything, ran the tests on everything, and created artifacts that we later deployed to production. Exactly what I do now at Applitools, but but we had a CI team there that all it did was build a CI around Team City. So that was amazing. They did dependency management, which I'll talk about later and which I really missed. But it was all in-house. So back in 2015, you could do CI/CD, but it needed a lot of work. And jump now to 2020. I mean, I built a CI system in like 2 weeks, not at Applitools, but the previous company. And CD is like so simple. We'll talk about that. I mean, 2 weeks of one developer, 3, maybe 4 weeks of one developer, boom, you have a CI/CD, which is like glorious. So, and that is the big difference. You could do CI/CD in 2015, but it was difficult. 2020, if you're starting off, boom, it's so easy.
Yeah.
Yoni?
Yeah, I feel almost the same. Like as I said, I'm a consultant. So I remember that back then in 2015, all of my customer, including the strongest team, really very, very talented developers, like no one knew how to create a CI. So they kind of asking me, hey, can you create the CI for us? Can you call some ops guy? It wasn't even called ops then. It's for someone who can make a CI for us. And now it's
the sysadmin.
Yeah, exactly. Someone smart who can assemble that janking things. And now in 2020, like almost every developer do it alone. I think that the changes are so dramatic from 2015 that there's almost nowhere to go from here, almost. I mean, in the sense that if you look at all the CI vendors and their offering, it's so similar that if I'll let you look at a YAML file of Travis or GitHub, I'm not sure that anyone here would recognize the differences.
I agree.
So much similar. The capabilities are so the same. Before this meeting, I wanted to do some homework, so I went into Circle CI and Git and Circle CI and code build. What's new section, latest release? Like nothing. No features that I can even understand. It looks like it's so mature now that no one is able to innovate almost. And should I try to deduce from this to the future? It looks more or less like solid. If you're already doing that typical CI with YAML and all these familiar steps, auditing your dependencies, some testing, complexity check, coverage, all of this stuff, you're good. It's not. It's I think almost not going to change in 2022. Unlike CD. CD is exactly the opposite. I mean, it feels to me like a field that's in an ongoing soul searching process. Very few things changed in past few years. Most of the platform could perform blue-green deployment 4 or 5 years ago. And in the latest, like in the latest mainstream CD frameworks, this is what you can do now. Yeah, there are some more advanced deployment techniques, but they are still niche. The supporting frameworks are not yet matured. So CD is the field that is really evolving and growing. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's probably because like the deployment changed more than like the production system, all the orchestration, serverless platforms and so on just changed much more than CI did. Because CI is more like a concept, I think, than specifically like tooling and methodology. But yeah, I'll maybe I'll try and give a bit of a different perspective, even maybe a gloomy one as well. I'll take back into maybe 2013, 2014 for me. We were back at HP Enterprise doing marketplace built with PHP and Java and some other kind of languages. And guess which part of the code base, in which language did not have tests? PHP or Java?
PHP.
Nailed it. Yeah, the chef nailed it. Yeah, so we didn't have the tester, and like obviously over time that was something very hard to maintain and a lot of the issues. So our CI process was basically us, each of the devs were like coding some stuff, obviously not much tests, running some tests locally, pushing that to a staging environment using some custom scripts. I remember like there was like a small like a discussion around Perl scripts and stuff like that. That was funny like back then. Yeah, but no, we weren't using Perl scripts. So just it's a small anecdote as a reference.
I was using Perl scripts in 2000 in RCI. Seriously.
Perl is still alive and kicking.
Yeah,
go
probably.
to booking.com, you'll see it. So anyway, that was then, right? Here I think Yoni and Gil already like covered. It's much more advanced, much more easily done. I don't know if for the future, for 2020, 2022, but I remember someone discussing with me about a startup they had, probably still have, that the whole point of it was to run your entire CI, like they mimic your entire CI, but do it locally. And their idea was, like the idea of that is because it's a bit more complicated today. You have to put on a lot of Docker containers and so many CI processes and so on. And devs just, it's first of all, a lot more resources required on the cloud and therefore more costs from the organization. And so, I don't know like where that startup lives today. It's going to be interesting to check, but it seems a bit counterintuitive to me because like everyone tries to move off to the cloud and if you have seen the GitHub satellite kind of session a few days ago, I think it was. So they talked about having the VS Code, right? The code on the cloud. So everything kind of like moves to the cloud, but CI remains locally. It was funny to hear about it, and I wish them success. But I don't know if that defines the future or not. It's definitely going to be interesting.
Last point.
I feel you have a question, Gail.
I have to disagree with Yoni. He's below me here in the video. I think Kubernetes. If you're not using Kubernetes, you're in a load of trouble with CD. But if you are using Kubernetes, then definitely Kubernetes is a CD platform. I mean, it is so easy to deploy today with Kubernetes. It's a YAML file, just like the GitHub Actions and the Circle CIs and whatever. You just change the YAML file, push it to GitHub, and just deploy it with kubectl apply, and boom, your deployment is in production. We built like 300 lines of code around that, just do a little bit of global stuff and everything, but that's about it for CD. So I have to disagree with Yoni on the CD stuff, and it will probably get better in 2022, 2025.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but when I look at it from the developer perspective, so let's take for example, 5 years ago I was using AWS Beanstalk, a typical platform as a service, popular one, and they have Bluegreen Deployment. So speaking about techniques, what I can do now is Kubernetes out of the box, and we have a section exactly about this. So maybe keep all the smallest details to that. But what I can do with Kubernetes now out of the box is Bluegreen Deployment. So I get kind of the same value, and 5 years where 5 year lasted, it's a lot. I was expecting for more.
Right.
Yoni, sorry, just one thing. You mentioned a couple of times Bluegreen Deployment, and honestly, I don't know what's that about, and maybe other participants don't know as well. Can you say a couple of words so we get the reference?
Sure. Thanks for pointing this out. And we have a dedicated section on deployment, so we will probably be a bit more descriptive there, but just to give some clue now. So the idea behind Bluegreen Deployment is that anytime you have your baseline version, the things that now works in production, and then you want to deploy a new version, the candidate. So at that point, you first start deploying the candidate, the next version, before you kill the old version, you start rolling out. There are different styles, but the main idea is that you roll the next version first, you get some confidence that it looks okay. The new code is being able to deploy, the process is up, and you get some confidence that the next version seems more or less okay. And only then you start phasing out the previous version. So it's kind of a gradual approach for rolling out a new version.
Let's continue to the next slide.
Let's do it.
And this time I'll take care of the 10 minutes. We have 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yes.
All right. CI. What was it?
No,
all right.
We should obey to the chef.
Or else get fired. CI with GitHub. Our ingredients today are enriching GitHub experience with a CI info, and will GitHub actions kill CIs? That one, Yoni, I know that I can smell that this is from you. That second bullet.
Yeah.
Actually, not me.
It's not you.
Not me. Maybe it's me. I don't know.
All right, we want.
Yoni, let's start. It's you.
Cool. So CI within GitHub, enriching GitHub experience with CI info. Yeah. So before that, maybe a short intro, because not everyone probably aware GitHub.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Yeah, and now also rolling for about a year, rolling their own CI, mostly CI solution. It's mostly branded GitHub Actions. And there are two opportunities here around GitHub. One is using GitHub for almost everything, like the CI, the code, of course, but also for artifact management, like store your packages. And also there are people using GitHub for ops kind of stuff. But GitHub becomes kind of a hub for many of the development services you probably conduct now, but with different vendors. This is one opportunity. The second one, if you don't want to leave you're satisfied with your current CI provider, then at least you can enrich your GitHub experience with various information from that CI. So just to exemplify a few, anytime you run your build on Travis or Circle or whatever, you can finally put, let's assume that it's a PR and the CI now inspect a new PR. You can then annotate the PR and include within the PR exactly what CI step were conducted, which one of them failed. You can even annotate down to the line level. So say, for example, you ran ESLint, kind of linting in external CI. If someone of some specific code file in line failed, you can show this in GitHub pull request changed files. So this is a kind of an overview of how GitHub is related to CI. Now, more specifically to, so I covered a bit how you can enrich GitHub experience with CI info.
Yeah, let's talk about that more. Like it sounds like pull requests will be a lot more, giving you a much more richer experience in terms of there will be various data points that you can then annotate on the PR itself. And we've seen some improvements from GitHub on this, on the pull requests, all I think through the last year or so. And, you know, like one of them related to that was the code owners, right? You can set specific code owners as responsible people who would be specifically like directly assigned when specific like directories or files are changed. And so what I'm kind of like maybe continuing the discussion with you, Yoni, is it seems like GitHub is setting us for a very immersive dev experience all around, because they have all of that data. They have the code, they have the CI, and so they can do it in a much more integrated way, where you would like maybe not even have to leave the GitHub like website, right, to go through all of that. I'm assuming this is their you know, the end game.
Yep. I mean, it's a political issue in essence. Yes, GitHub allows integrating other CIs, and the integration is really good. I mean, I'm using Circle, and the integration is really nice. But, you know, if it's there, people will start using it. So I'm guessing in terms of open source, a lot of companies will either migrate or start anew with GitHub Actions. It's a political problem. I don't know what the answer is. At least it's Microsoft in the helm and not some really evil
why
company.
political?
It's
Yeah.
just a small, because anything to do with non-technical issues, which is what the GitHub situation is. Like 99% of open source is today in GitHub. That's a political issue. Yeah, and unfortunately, I see all open source migrating to GitHub Actions in the coming years, or most of it. Definitely new projects. I mean, I tried GitHub Actions in my open source projects. It's like so easy compared to doing other stuff. Even if Circle is easy, it's still easier with GitHub Actions. And unfortunately, it's a really good system. So, I mean, there's no incentive anymore to use Circle or Travis, which is why it's a political situation and it's problematic. And I think this isn't the place to talk about it.
Gil, my takeaway from this talk is you saying, unfortunately, it's a really good system. That's my takeaway.
Yeah, because that makes the monopoly even stronger. Yes.
Yes.
Maybe just share with the audience what are GitHub Actions. I didn't cover this, and it's a very interesting ecosystem. Just a side note, I must say, is that I feel more or less like Gil, like having one big vendor now controlling everything. I don't know, doesn't feel very natural, but let's shift to the main point here. So GitHub Actions are maybe one of the biggest strengths in CI, because all the vendors, CI vendors, have kind of a marketplace for extensions. And when I say extension, is all of the things that can all of these things that enrich your CI and do various checks. Like an extension might be something that checks your coverage, or generate kind of reports, check vulnerabilities. So GitHub created their own marketplace for their CI, which is called GitHub Action. And it's growing very fast. Like in the past few months, they already reached almost 4,000 of extension for this CI. And it feels like, we're doing educated guess here, obviously, but it feels like it's going to be by far the most popular marketplace for CI actions. So it's going to be a big competitive advantage for GitHub and the corporate behind it.
Yep.
Yeah, I've seen other use cases on that. Just like pique everyone's curiosity, which is people just use that as a job runner in a sense, where you could like run things. You could probably do the same with other vendors, but I've seen that as a practical way of just scheduling jobs. So there's probably going to be, if they open the APIs, that's going to be an interesting way to further interact with it.
Yep. Let's continue.
Sure thing. So what do you test in a CI pipeline to ensure CD is fault-proof? And that kind of touches, I think, Alon's kind of like comment on testing when we were discussing on like what is CI. So I don't know, like, do you actually do CD? How many people have you seen in the organizations you work with that actually like do the full CI/CD, like they actually do a continuous deployment? Is that like the majority of everyone?
Yoni, you're in touch with more people, more companies.
First, we have a dedicated deploy. Also, I believe we have, no, this is the deployment.
Yeah, this is the deployment one. So basically here we're asking about, once we have deployed, how do we know this is fault proof? Like we haven't maybe contaminated or broken.
I think the question is, what do you test in a CI pipeline? And my point here is everything. We're a bit different. We have like 150 packages, and each package is tested separately. But for each microservice, let's say, I test, the complex logic is tested in unit tests. The whole microservice is tested in what Yoni calls a component test. I call an integration test. I do little end-to-end just to check that the Docker image that I generate for that microservice is okay. when I was doing frontend at Wix, I did visual testing to ensure that my CSS is tested correctly. I did integration tests on frontend using JS DOM. There's also the aspect-oriented ones. I always update my dependencies to the latest ones. It's not exactly a test, but I do use a Sneak. Sorry, I heard it's called Sneak to test that my dependencies are fine. So that's basically whatever I can test. Whatever I can test, I do test. The value you get when you're testing something it doesn't matter if it's in a CI pipeline or not, is so big because that allows you to do your changes so easily and integrate so easily that the value for me is huge, and whatever I can test, I do test.
I'm wondering if there's a limit to what you would test, just because everything you add takes more time and complexity, right?
Yeah.
Yes, which I solved by basically segregating
more
all my
CIs.
code. Yeah. Part of my tests are in Circle, part of my tests are in Travis, part in GitHub Actions. Yeah, right. What we do is we take all our code and we segregate it into. We have around 150 packages, and when we're committing and pushing, we're basically changing 1 or 2 packages, and we only test those packages and their dependencies. So that means that whenever I push, I don't need to test everything, which means that I don't need to have these hour-long runs of test suites. If you do have those hour-long runs of test suites, then yes, you need dineros, you need money at GitHub Actions, at Circle CI, at Travis, and all those, so that you can parallelize things easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my approach is not surprisingly quite similar to Gil's. I think that the strategy is to maybe twofold. One is to start testing as early as possible, something that looks as similar to production as possible. So in plain words, focus on tests that really looks like the real thing. I refer to test with database, test with including load testing. Be as close as possible to what you're using and going to face. But this is the second part. But be very minded to ROI. So I'm sure that Gil meant this. I don't.
Yes.
My goal is to test as less as possible.
Yes.
I didn't say this, that the one who says it is Kent Beck. So you wouldn't expect, Kent Beck, by the way, is kind of the father of TDD and very exhaustive testing. And so, yeah, you want to test as less as possible. And one of the ways to achieve this is with kind of narrow integration component test, where you have kind of a blueprint of your microservice that is quite similar to production. And this way you can avoid from doing a lot of kind of testing. Yeah, sometimes it's unavoidable and it's absolutely fine to also do unit tests, but I think that you want to choose the set of tests that gives you most confidence with less effort. One of the great ways to achieve it, as Gil already alluded, is automated tools, like all of these kind of robots. Check for me the vulnerabilities, check my complexity, all the things that you configure once and work for you forever. And there are many new tools like this, like CLI that will check if you forgot a token in your, a secret token in your code, and a lot of robots that can provide great ROI.
You know, an interesting thing that while you were talking, and by the way, not only Ken Beck, Guillermo Roche has this wonderful quote.
No.
Write tests, not too many, mostly integration. I love that. It's gonna be on my on my deathbed. It's like write tests, not too many, mostly integration. Anyway, but the interesting is what do we not write? And for me, What we not write, and that was a very big surprise at Applitools, we don't write a big end-to-end test where we cover everything. We only test at the microservice level. And it was in the beginning, we still do. We have this end-to-end test, which takes a Kubernetes thing and throws all the microservices in it and tests it. We don't use it anymore. It's amazing. It's amazing how if you have good tests for your microservices and good CD that constantly throws those microservices at production on a daily basis, you don't need that big end-to-end test that tests everything in a staging environment or in a whatever environment. That was a big surprise for me at Applitools. I'm sure there are places where you do need these kinds of things, but at least from my perspective, think twice before building that big end-to-end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one different angle to highlight here, because we're speaking about CD in production, I think that all of us feel that as good as our testing are, we still, what can we do? Bugs still sneak into production. So one of the modern and very useful type of test is what the slang calls testing in production, in the sense that, okay, now I'm trying to discover as much as possible on the dev side, but I'm acknowledging that it's not always possible. So I'm going to test also during deployment and after deployment. And I refer to techniques like Canary and even Bluegreen that we mentioned already, and feature flagging. And the idea behind all of them is that I can test my next version over a very limited subset of users. So even if something went wrong, then I have additional safety net. And the last safety net is testing over the production itself, which I know all of us doing. And it's really, it's one of my biggest discoveries of the last year.
It's not a safety net anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to touch a brief on it, it's one of the techniques is just run end-to-end test. The one you already have that you wrote for your development, but just point it to production. So you kind of having a bot, a user bot.
1 minute.
1 minute, okay. I need 10 seconds. That every 3 minutes, approach your production, your front-end pages, and simulate all the user behavior over your production. And if something is wrong, it just throw a metric. So this is the last safety net on the deployment pipeline.
Yeah,
Here.
I'll take that last bullet on. I'll just chime on that. How do you ensure a CD is a successful process? And what we've done is it's similar to what you were saying before, Yoni, with the tests. So we were writing, good pieces of happy path, end-to-end tests, and so on, and then we've taken specific flows out of those and used them as the sanity test. So after deployment happens, we actually replay those tests on production. So this is just to ensure that happy paths still remain. And if any of those tests fail, that's a really big red alert to us to check what's going on. I guess there's a lot of other things that we can discuss on what do you do after the CD process, and that's like performance test and anything else that performance did not degrade and so many things. But yeah, for the sake of timing for the chef, we'll continue to the next slide.
Time's up.
Time's up. Quality gates and tools. So that's an interesting question. What considers as quality? And maybe Daniel remember, but we had a meetup on that, I think maybe 2 years ago with the JSHeroes community in Romania. And that took a lot of focus in terms of all the cross-cutting concerns, right? It was, we just said it, right? Performance of the website loading, that's quality of what you write, right? The security vulnerabilities that might exist, or the accessibility of that. So many things that you could generally pull into that quality thing. And so, I don't know, Yoni, Gil, what are you putting as like the quality kind of standards that you want when you're deploying something?
We put our users as our best quality gates.
Yeah, besides our users.
Not totally joking, obviously. We all do that in essence. Yes, our users are our best quality gates. But joke aside, whatever we can, we use Sneak to check our security. We update our dependencies religiously. If we have a storybook, so we're dogfooding ourselves and visually testing our storybook with all our components on it using Applitools eyes. So basically, any tool that we can use, we use. But those are, I think, are big, like 3-4 quality gates.
Interesting. Is anyone doing performance testing? This is something that we actually did. Are you actually doing that too?
No.
Are you doing it as part? I mean, are you doing it as part of CI?
Okay. I wanted to answer that. No, I'm not a huge fan. Well, we're doing it as part of our build. Okay. I'm not a huge fan of those tools that go independently and check your repo. I know Sneak does it. Sorry, I don't do that. But Sneak also has, like, you can do it as part of your build, so that's fine. I'm not a fan. Anything that can be done as part of your build and test, do it there. I don't like things that happen only in CI, because when they happen only in CI, two things happen. One, they get ignored usually. Two, there's no way to reproduce and check them and fix them and, you know, have a nice development experience around these things. So if I have a quality gate besides my tests, they are part of my tests. If I had static analysis, it would be part of my tests. When I'm using Sneak, it's part of my test. When I'm doing a storybook testing, using visual testing, it's part of my test. I don't really differentiate between quality gates like Sneak and others and testing. It's just different tools, that's all. Yoni, which quality gates are you using? Your customers?
Yeah, mostly. I mean, mostly the one that you mentioned. I'm trying all the time to check out new things. So, for example, one of the recent tools that I onboarded into my CI. By the way, if someone is interested, I have a diagram with all the tools that I'm using in a CI. So just shoot me on. Maybe I'll paste it afterward in the meetup page if it's useful for someone. So yeah, we covered the basics, and I think that this is the 90% at least. I'm checking out things like, I'm checking now an NPM tool that is discovering automatically during testing memory leaks, which are not that rare in Node.js. It's not noisy, by the way, but I don't have enough time with it to complexity checker usually works for me. The thing with this kind
do
of
you do it
tool,
on CI, or this is an IDE thing for you?
Yeah, so the things that I think that I'm using it in CI also, but the thing with these tools that you can only catch, also coverage is also a good example for this. I'm also using coverage, but the thing is they are good to check like extreme deviation from your expectation. Like if suddenly you have a story that happened to me last week, I noticed during a CI that I had 40% drop in coverage. Ooh. So this is kind of obvious mistake. This is something that every developer would love to know about. What happens, I mistakenly left a skip statement over one of my
test case.
And this is where the CI just saved me. But it was easy because it's a huge drop. If it was 1, 2, 3%, then it would become much more.
Yoni, you know, there's a jest linter for catching those things before you commit.
Yeah.
Eyal Perry asked about performance test.
Do we have questions?
In the chat, you just.
Oh, okay.
I'm on it.
Cool. Do we want to take that, or do it at the end?
I've tried so many times doing performance tests and failed miserably. I'm sorry. I'm unworthy.
Yeah, I guess it depends. What are you doing in terms of performance? That could be so many things as well. Is it your front end, your back end? Like if a page load is slow, there's a whole debugging experience first, right? Like why is it slow? Is it, again, which one of the components? Is it then a back end kind of like a dependent API that slows everything down? So I guess that's more of having observability into what actually happens, so you could apply the right performance testing. I mean, it doesn't directly correlate, but the idea of, you should know what you should test, and of course you should measure it, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't know how you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Chef.
No, go ahead. Good.
One of the challenges with performance testing in production is that we have the autoscaler to hide from us most of the code inefficiencies. So even if we have some kind of bottleneck inside, we still would be able to serve enough user because we have auto-scaling on. Auto-scaling is an amazing way of, and this is why I think that more projects should consider peak testing. So what are peak testing? They are like performance testing, but their goal is not to answer, can we serve this amount of users? Because we can, thanks to auto-scaling, it just will cost a lot. Peak testing means we don't scale. We test over a single unit. Hey, Gil's wife.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like that CNN.
We have a question about.
Yeah, she has a question about cooking or CICD.
About the laundry.
Yeah. No, that laundry is mine.
Yeah, I asked you about the laundry. That's what I was saying.
Yep, definitely.
You finished that one. Go ahead, Yoni.
Yeah, so I started to cover peak testing. So peak testing means to indeed discover inefficiencies in our code. So the idea is that you don't scale. You always try to put stress on one unit. And then in many times what I discover, mostly in Node.js land, is that there is something that highly slows down the thing. It's usually a method that is keeps the CPU busy for too long. And in many times after 1-2 days of peak testing, we're able to decrease the throughput in at least 2-3 times more. So the downside of performance testing is that the autoscaler, again.
It's important though. I mean, if you have observability, you will know that you've spawned more pods or whatever than you needed. But I think Eyal pointed out that the Neuralink thing, I'm just saying that on the chat if anyone is curious what we're talking about. The idea is to get, first of all, some kind of observability and then test it. So go ahead. Yeah.
And I think that's the real keyword for performance testing. Doing it in like staging area or whatever won't really give you good results because it's never like production. But if you have the key performance metrics in production using observability techniques or whatever techniques you have, then you can monitor them and alert on them and get the problems. And then, yeah, you'll have to troubleshoot them in production. But anyway, they happen only in production. So yeah, for me, maybe that's why I'm not doing performance testing anymore as a quality gate because I have good observability in my production system.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Go ahead, Jenny.
Just a question that is always interesting. I wanted to ask you both. One of the classic quality gate is coverage. Do you use it? Yes, no, and why?
Yes, I use it all the time. Code cov, and I use it as a pre-commit hook. If you look at my projects for libraries, at least, that's still not for microservices. But if you look at libraries, I have that I can't push anything if it's not beyond whatever threshold I put, which is usually by default for me, it's like an 85 or something %. So I strive to go upon that. And only when I'm really upset in the mood, I do like a force push and ignore that. But like generally, I do not push anything that doesn't have that.
I very much dislike code coverage. The only time I've tried it, I was like, no, I'm starting to write tests just to make the coverage right. And for me, that is not right. For me, the best way to figure out if I have good coverage of tests or not is what I call the shakeometer. It's this thing where you put it on your wrists, and when you're doing deploy and you press enter on the deploy, if your wrist is shaking too much, then the shakeometer beeps, and you know you don't have enough tests. I rely on our developers' intuition. While yes, there are companies that it doesn't work that way. The companies that I've worked in, fortunately for me, it worked in not good enough so that we rely on our developers to have good test coverage, and it's pretty much worked that way.
Mm-hmm.
Next player, we're out of time.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, let's see if we get questions. This is the time to open it up if anyone has questions, and if we'll use all the time for the questions. That's amazing. If not, we can try and do a very quick one or just wrap it up. So this is the time to post any questions. You can, Daniel, can they generally just unmute themselves and start talking or posting that in the chat?
Yeah, they can unmute and just,
awesome.
I think it's easier. So if you guys have any question, just unmute yourself and ask away.
Okay. So 20 seconds. I'll just add in the interim while we're waiting for questions, and feel free to unmute yourself. We are eagerly waiting for questions.
Can I ask Gil something? Gil,
yes,
you said that you don't do any E2E tests, and as much as it surprises you, I am also extremely surprised that. And I was wondering if you don't have E2E test, and what means do you have to achieve confidence in the seams between the microservices in the integrations? How do you achieve confidence there?
Continuous deployment. Two things. One, we never, at least consciously, break our compatibility. So whenever we change a microservice, we only add stuff to it. We never like change it so that it's incompatible. That's the conscious thing. But obviously, you can theoretically break something without knowing it. And the answer here is continuous deployment. If we constantly deploy our code every time, then when something does break, we immediately know about it in our test after deployment. Remember production tests? We immediately know the problem and roll back very, very quickly. This happened to me in the last 2 years about 10 times, maybe 15 times. And that is the reason we've stopped doing the end-to-end test. It is so rare to have such a problem, and end-to-end tests are so expensive to maintain, and they're so flaky and problematic that we've just basically given up on them. The value is not there.
And just to add to this one observation, by the way, I'm positive about having like few end-to-end testing, but I must share that in most of the time when I visit my customers, their end-to-end testing environment is broken. For whatever reason, it's red. Something broke that huge environment where all the different teams ship a new version of the microservice for that. For some reason, it's most of the time broken. With time, they start ignoring it or just taking the insight from there with a grain of salt. So.
Yep, totally.
You said that to gain confidence, you discover bugs by testing in production, right? After you deploy, your test in production discover it. So what kind of test are you running? If it isn't E2E, then what test are you running in production that give you confidence?
Oh, that's an E2E test, definitely.
So
but
you
it's
run
running
E2E test and after deployment?
Yes. But it's like 2 minutes. That's it. It's a happy path.
Just the happy path? Just the happy path.
Yeah, Alon, I think the key here is not running end-to-end test at all. It's not having the majority of them, so they don't run slow and go through all the paths possible to test something.
Remember, we've covered ourselves very nicely with all the microservice tests. Okay, don't forget that. We just need to cover the happy path, and like 99.99999% of the time, it's good.
And there is additional layers that Gil didn't cover here, and I know that he's not a fan of this layer, but if you want to get, if you need and want to get a bit more confidence on the interaction, the integration, then you have also contract tests, which Liran can for sure speak better than I do for them. So you have additional type of test that allows you to discover if component A is not compatible with component B without instantiating a huge environment with everything. You still stay on a single microservice test, but you can get some clue about your integration quality.
If you even do it right, you will have a compatibility matrix of versions between two microservices. or by the way, that could be an API, a front end and an API, and understand what was the last version that actually worked.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes, sir. I have one.
Name?
So you spoke relatively thoroughly about, you mentioned Traverse and Circle and GitHub Actions, but you mainly focused on those SaaS applications, right? Where you can CD continuously. I would like to hear your views on what happens when we work on applications that are running on premise with hosted Bitbucket or GitLabs, and when we do deployment to a testing environment, not to a cloud. So how would you say the practices are different, differs? What do you think about hosted services versus cloud GitHub services? This whole on-premise world, which is a bit different.
Yeah.
As long as you're not using Jenkins, it's okay.
No love for Jenkins here.
Cry, please don't cry for me, Argentina, but yes.
I would say there's like the fact that you use GitHub or anything else hosted, that's just the service where it's at, right? It's more about, you know, banking doesn't want to get like their source code out, etc. So I view it more as of that than any other obstacle. So like the other thing is like, you know, feature parity and so on. So I guess you're asking mostly how do we test to ensure that what we then deliver for an on-premise installation is actually working as it should, right?
Well,
but yes, I still would still love to hear your views on the difference of this development side.
I think the question was mostly on-premise CI systems, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I personally don't see any fundamental reason. I mean, there is a great movement of all the cloud tools are now start to support on-prem install. GitLab is a great example. GitLab allows you to install it locally. And actually it's even easier because one of the toughest thing in CICD is security. How do you integrate your CI and your runtime production in on-prem? It's much easier in a closed network, which naturally brings us to the next topic that is security, right? Or
just one sec. GitLab CI is a wonderful CI. It's modern. It's like Git-based. Everything is really good. I love it.
I would say even more. I think that this market has two visionaries, like two leading products in terms of vision and innovation. It's GitLab and Liran, I forgot the name of the company, the Israeli company that is based on containers. I'll get to it later. But GitLab are kind of one of the visionaries companies, and they're amazing.
Do you have any other questions?
No.
And it's CodeFresh.com.
Right.
Okay, CodeFresh,
Yeah.
And by the way, GitHub, one of the ideas of GitHub Actions is that every step lives in a Docker container. Every different step runs in a different Docker container. So your CI is kind of an orchestration of many Docker containers. CodeFresh invented this. It comes from CodeFresh. This was their vision. And
Yep. But then you have to, if I remember the CodeFresh YAML file, you still have to like mount specific artifacts between one to another, like to attach it to a workspace and so on, so that they're available if you need them for the further steps. But that's technicality. It's a great product.
Are we continuing or
I don't know, Daniel, how are we at time?
We have time as much as you guys want.
I can go all night.
I'm good with it. Lots
Right.
of new information for me.
All right, so back to securing our supply chain. How do we do that correctly? What security testing do you do today? So I think, Gil, you mentioned you're doing like upgrading automatically on build or on CI, everything, right?
Upgrade religiously.
Really?
NPM update on every build. I don't care. NPM update only does Semver minor. So that doesn't include Semver major things. The reason we can do that, by the way, and not be afraid is, again, the big enabler. We have good tests. Once you have good tests, why not do an NPM update? You don't care. Not only that, we do Semver major like once every 3 weeks or whatever. Me, whenever I touch the code of a package, boom, I do a Semver major upgrade of all the packages, run the test, see that everything's okay, and then start coding. I'm really religious about that. Yep.
So just to emphasize that, how different is what Gil is doing from the best practice of the industry. So what you're saying, Gil, not like what people usually do, using some tool like Sneak or Greenkeeper that is doing PR, and then you have to approve every time your dependencies got aged. After some time, there is a PR, and then you have to approve this PR and merge them into your code. You're doing something different. You automatically just update your dependencies in every CI run, of course, respecting Semver, but without any human judgment, just update, right?
Yes. I'm a huge fan of this. It works.
Yeah, if it works, don't touch it.
What do you think about, Liran, what do you like? Your take on this?
I'm not in a rush to update anything that works. If we want to talk about that line for programmers, I am actually a big fan of automating it, having something, just like you said, whether it's like Sneak or GitHub or whatever you use. I'd be happy if something can push in an upgrade for me and allow me to, on my time, see what are the changes, because we've seen many incidents. That doesn't happen every day, right? But we've seen still many incidents in terms of, probably half a dozen, if not more, where we had those malicious packages, some versions that were Semvers. Event Stream is one of them. I think ESLint Scope is another one, and so on, where people would be able to just send off one malicious version that does something. And, if you just take that update automatically, generally speaking, that's an issue, right? Depending on what was malicious package doing. So I've also seen, doing a lot of things here at Sneak in terms of like the community perspective and feedback and so on. One thing that I've seen a lot, and I've actually, all the post-mortems I've read, well, not all, but definitely a few. I think Event Stream was one of those, from other people, like not the maintainer or us doing it, but other people who actually reported the issue to Node1 and to others, was that they found the issue again, and the other thing that is kind of like unfortunate in this story, right, with all of those supply chain incidents, was no one caught them. It was the community catching all of those and saying, after 2 months or after 1 month, saying, well, this package now, when I do an npm install, is showing a warning, or breaking because something happened. And this is how we're finding them. And one of those postmortems was actually going through like the release notes and the change logs, and then comparing the source code of like the tagged version on GitHub versus npm, etc. And this is how I actually found out that something is weird, right? And that's what I think we're finding. We're finding that those change logs, when you want to upgrade something, 1.xx to whatever, you actually want to see what are the changes, and like maybe you will not go and dive deep into it. But it's interesting, what am I bringing in? And also what is also interesting when you automate all of those stuff is maybe you get this kind of like we call it merge advice, right? We will show a badge, when we open a pull request, and say this has like 97% rate of like successful merge, because that's what we've seen on other pull requests that we have tested, like the same one from when they merged it. And so what I'm saying here, of course, is it's like a two-edged sword in the sense of, it's nice to see the upgrade and the change logs of one package, but then what happens when there are like updates in that package that pulls in more of those? So you don't have that kind of visibility, and you can't go chase every dependent package's change logs, because that's just going down the rabbit hole. But that's what it is.
Interesting. So you are basically saying two things. First, lazy update. Wait sometimes. Let the community discover for you potential attack. And the second thing is human review before a PR before merging. So I want to question. I'm very curious to hear Gil's take on this, but I want to ask you about these human PRs. Does it really work in the sense that there are so many package updates that the dev team might see tons of PR, and at some point maybe I don't know, maybe it's going to be just like a PR that no one really inspects. It's just overread and people just approve it because they don't have the capacity to really inspect each package change.
Yeah. So we have a solution for that, right? Which is with a sneak settings page, like you can go in and say, I want to at any point in time, I want to have only like 5, that's like given the default, right? Only 5 pull requests open to minimize the noise for the team. To be honest, I have I'm managing quite a few NPM packages and I'm getting those PRs. I haven't been overwhelmed and I'm a single person doing this at home. So it's not like you're getting 20 or 30 of those a week. It's not at that rate. And there's like, I don't think it's going to be always like human change. Like maybe you will want to see several major changes as like a human factor reviewing it. But maybe at one point in time, you'll say, well, if the merge device is 90% and up, there's like a good change, good chance it will not break anything. Maybe there will be an option that says, if everything went through, already merge it on the spot. I don't know. Maybe that's going to be something that would be as much similar as what Gil is doing.
And just to make sure, we pass through a security gate for all our updates. So if there is a malicious update, then Sneak will find it. I'm good with that.
Unless it's unknown, right?
Unless it's unknown. We could implement, if we wanted, some kind of update all the dependencies that are like 3 weeks old or something like that. That's fine also, and it makes total sense. We just didn't do it yet or even thought about it. But definitely pass it through a quality gate like Sneak, do it like this, but update constantly, or else the problem is if you're not updating constantly, whether through PR or through whatever, after a while, it becomes almost impossible to update your dependencies. And when that happens and the security problem arises because of a malicious package, then you have a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can continue next.
Local CI, look at that. It's, we touched on that topic a bit. So should we allow all quality checks on dev machine? And I think, Gil, you made it very obvious that you actually run everything locally. You want to do this because it's easy to debug if something breaks. It's easy to reproduce if like for another dev, if something breaks. I don't think anyone feels different on this here.
Definitely. I mean, I've seen a lot of situations where if it doesn't run in CI, you can't run it locally because the CI has steps that, run Docker and running a database. So the CI step is run a database and then run the step. Wrong. Okay. Because when you want to run that test in locally, then you have to remember what to do. No. Part of the test is running that database. It's so easy today with Docker and Docker Compose. Same for front end. The test has to include everything that you need to execute that test. That's a no-brainer for me, because otherwise, if you have problems in that test, how do you debug it locally? So yes, definitely, everything in CI should run locally.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, our community, the JavaScript, is based on open source tools. It's not obvious, by the way, because in a Java world, for example, many of the projects rely on a kind of products for quality checks, like like SonarQube. So it's kind of a big product that are doing a lot of the checks. Our world is constituted of very known open source projects, so it's very easy to run all the obvious linting and all the quality checks locally as on CI. Not to mention that most CI now allow you to run with single CLI command the same pipeline, more or less. The harder part, as Gil said, it's when we're speaking about integration and Docker, and I think, yeah, the sweet spot, just to emphasize what Gil said, it's Docker Compose. Docker Compose with all the Kubernetes bells and whistles. Docker Compose is eventually the common denominator that only if you're using this, you can retain the same configuration locally and in most CI system, even GitHub already supported. Yeah, Liran, curious to hear your
yeah, for us it was we're having also a Docker Compose setup. It was bringing up something like 30 microservices for every developer. Yeah, because the infra team had like 10 because there's the configuration service, authentication service, authorization service, so many services, and then you have like API services from the different teams as well. So it was quite a mess. I think it is a common denominator because just using the reachability to using Docker, that's pretty easy, right? That's pretty ubiquitous. It's like telling people to install thing with npm. It's coming with Node, so it's there. It's easy. I don't think it's like relating to that second bullet, like how to make developers environment and CI almost identical. I don't think that is a very achievable situation in terms of I don't want to have everything local to me. Sometimes I can't. Sometimes I'm working with like my backend APIs are going to be big big data databases. I'm not going to spin off all of that, right? And what I've seen working is there's some data that we were mocking. We were using the contract testing thing, and we were just pulling off providers for us. So we're doing that. So I think it's a more complicated environment, but definitely there are situations where I don't think you need a whole thing. Like to make the problem obvious, let's go to the extreme and try to figure out if all the microservices running on I don't know, Netflix, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you want. It doesn't make sense that all of them run locally for each dev.
Which is why you need to test only microservices and not test a lot of them at the same time. I agree.
Yeah, but do you test all the microservices locally as well?
Never. I told you, we had an end-to-end test, we threw it away. Because we do continuous deployment, we don't. If you test only one microservice or each microservice separately, okay, then there's no problem. The problem starts when you're trying to test a big end-to-end test. That's what I found. And I believe, and I think Wix is the same, that big end-to-end tests in a microservices environment, okay, are problematic to say the least. I think.
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't think anyone is saying it's the way to go.
So if you don't have those big end-to-end tests, then there's nothing stopping you from making your tests run in CI and locally the same.
Mm-hmm. Well, I share the same opinions about that. It's not a walk in the park, but I still usually find value in those. So I try at least at various steps at the CI, usually not in every commit, but at some point, it's not that hard today to have a dedicated serverless instance or a Kubernetes namespace.
Right.
And you already have so much artifact for this. You have your end-to-end test. You have that Kubernetes namespace to try to run the end-to-end test. Not as a quality gate in the sense that, hey, if my end-to-end test failed, then I stop the deployment, but it's kind of an additional insight that if you do it right, it shouldn't be like, it shouldn't fail, like have 80% noise ratio. I mean, it can be a bit flaky, but in most of the time it can provide value and additional confidence during deployment.
Next slide.
Yeah, let's try to run through them. Deployment, your preferred deployment techniques and tools. Who does Kubernetes, and is this the standard? I don't know. I'm not doing deployment a lot, so.
We do a lot. We're using Kubernetes, and we've built a very, very complex deployment mechanism using Helm. And then we threw it all away and built a very simple mechanism based on mustache templates. You know, mustache is like a JSP thing. Yeah, mustache templates, and just throwing it at kubectl apply. So we're basically generating the YAML files for Kubernetes and then applying them. That's it. It's like 300 lines of code. Very simple, very nice. And what I like about simple is that it's easily understandable. So you know what you're going to get in production. I love it. I mean, simple, beautiful, very Kubernetes oriented.
Mm-hmm. Are you doing it in any kind of a
Not in the sense of when you push, we deploy, okay? We do everything locally. I didn't say it, but even our CI is run locally, and we don't have a CI system. But deployment is like the developer runs the deployment locally, but everything they do, we deploy and then we commit. So if I'm changing a YAML file and deploying, that deploy will also commit and push. So every deploy is in Git. I know what the changes are during the day, and I know exactly what the changes to the YAML files are and what each deploy, what the version is, what the changes in the YAML files, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, we do Git ops in that sense, in that everything is in Git, but we don't do it on push. Yeah. I find that Kubernetes and the concept of YAML files or whatever, JSON, doesn't really matter, is a big enabler of very simple deployment mechanisms that are easy to understand and easy to work with.
I want to ask, I want to ask something that I think everyone has on their mind, and that is, are you saying, or is this what's happening, that developers now manage the deployment in the sense of directly asking you? Are developers on your company and Applitools are actually managing the Kubernetes YAML file? Is this?
Yeah. We don't have.
It's not a DevOps owned or like an ops owned.
We don't have ops. We are the ops. One day we will. I mean, maybe when we go over 1,000 or 2,000 machines, maybe we will, bring in an ops person. But we don't. Why? Why do I need it? I mean, monitoring is very easy today to do. Deployment is very easy if you're in the cloud. If you're not in the cloud, then yes, you need a sysadmin. Okay, you need someone to deploy Kubernetes itself. That's tons of work. But if you're in the cloud in a managed Kubernetes service, I'm starting to think, why do we need an ops person? Like, why? It's so easy. And yes, we do manage our YAML files and we do deploy constantly. Yes.
That's a good confirmation for me. Thank you.
Oh, sure. You were crazy.
I'll try to introduce a bit different view and be a bit more skeptic on the deployment tools efficiency. So I think that there is one fundamental problem with Bluegreen deployment. And quick recap: Bluegreen deployment is a technique that exists for years, and this is the best kind of deployment that Kubernetes can achieve automatically without you sweating and doing and having a second degree in ops. And the fundamental problem, or I'm not sure if it's a problem for everyone, but it's suboptimal scenario, is that the idea is that when you spin a new version, you're not killing the old one, which is great. So you have some grace period. And then once the next version, the candidate, signals once with a positive health status, at that point, it is considered a valid version. And then the old one is started to be destroyed. So
yes.
if your process just go up, maybe check the database connection and then report back. Yeah, I think that I'm okay. It compiles. I'm able to connect to the database. Things looks perfect. Then it is considered as a valid version, and the old one is being destroyed. But in reality, a lot of the production issues are being discovered afterward. Like consider a performance issue or something that spikes the CPU, increasing error rate. All of this stuff are discovered minutes or hours later. And they are, I mean, I'm really a big fan of the next version of the next line of deployment tools like Canary and stuff. I find it to be amazing concept where even you can even skip testing. You have something that will roll out your next version, serve it to a small subset of user, and then discover the issues for you. But however, in reality, although it is being spoken for lines and there are many frameworks for this, it's still so hard and pricey to get this new line of tools that, as I said, you need second degree in ops. There are, by the way, frameworks which are on their way to be mature, like Spinnaker, but it's not there for them.
Istio and their friends are definitely on the way. I agree with you. Canary deployments in Kubernetes are still like bleeding edge. We haven't seen the need for them, but I definitely can see why people need them. But remember, we talked about 2025. Canary will be mainstream by then in Kubernetes, and you know, you'll just talk about Canary like you're talking about Bluegreen deployment today.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the big hope for CD, I think.
Yeah, it'll happen. It will happen.
Righty.
Next slide. I think it's the last one.
Gil, you want to take this one? Just
How
like,
do we enable developers to own their CICD? Oh, just don't have any ops people. Very easy. Then suddenly,
and if you do, should they fire them? What's
no. I mean, it doesn't work in a large company. I understand that. I am crazy, but not that crazy. Okay, I understand the practicalities of this. But definitely, when you're talking about small to medium project, a group of talented developers, there's no real need to do that. And the way to do that isn't that hard. I mean, yes, it took me a while to figure out Kubernetes, but once I got it, it was like bam, 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 and it worked. So my next project, not that I'm leaving Applitools, if I'm taking Kubernetes, it will be like, like 10 minutes and I have a CI/CD, well, not 10 minutes, 3-4 days and I have a CI/CD on my own. And maybe I'm bleeding edge today, but in 5 years, I think this will start becoming standard practice for a lot of developers.
My take on that is, when I was working just a couple of years back in a company that does have like a centralized, so there's like, if people like know the history of DevOps, there's like few ways of implementing that in an org. You can have an ops person on each team, basically enabling a team, or you can have a centralized DevOps and like they enable the whole org and they manage priorities, etc. I was working with an organization having a centralized DevOps, and what I think I found is, first of all, it's useful. Like ops is not just Kubernetes, right? It's there's the ingress, the egress, whatever, all of those setups. Like, I don't know, like there's like so many metrics that they will monitor, they will know about, they will understand, they will know what fails, what to think about, what do you do about rollbacks, how do you apply that? So many things that in an ops kind of world. And so what I think that happens is, and what I've seen and I've liked it is, there's a DevOps people there that, they are, they build, like, that's why they're devs as well. Like, they can code, they build all the scripting, everything required, and give you an abstraction layer that you work within. And we know that as a Docker file or a Docker Compose, that's an abstraction. A Kubernetes YAML, that's also an abstraction to all of the environment, but also setting that up to begin with, understanding what happens if that fails. Should you be a multi-cloud kind of like deployment or not, because there are issues. Is there like cost or budget issues? These are things that they usually handle, and there's a lot of knowledge there. So I don't think it's going to go away. But if in 5 years or 10 years we're going to see all of that, all of what I said that the devs shouldn't maybe do, abstracted away as well, like serverless, for example, does that's going to be an amazing place indeed. Yoni? Your take? Any
Yeah,
take?
I don't have much I don't have much to add with what you said. I mean, I think that the basic answer is the question was, how do you make it easy for developers to own their CI? We have seen how. You just make it easy, and this is what you just make it a one simple YAML file, and this is what's going on. And you can see the difference in CD. CD is much more complicated now, and I see at least my customer.
But YAML is complicated to begin with.
Not that.
No,
Not
it
that
is.
complicated.
Sometimes it took me like 10 minutes to understand why the indentation is wrong. Frankly.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I mean, frankly, I don't understand YAML's indentation yet, but that's probably a personal problem. Yeah, I think there is a movement of many ops things, as you said, are becoming automated. For example, GitLab has a concept, which is of course a bit of a marketing slogan, but it's called auto ops. Like you click one button and you get automatic monitoring and stuff. But yeah, a lot of the ops stuff will be much more casual and enable developers to do more.
Righty.
Yeah, next slide.
CICD in monorepo setup.
That's for me, but I mean, it's late. It's 8:30. It's late. I can talk an hour about that.
No, don't talk an hour now.
Basically, there's one. The CI tools today do not work with monorepos. It's a hell. It's a mess. I hate it, and I use a monorepo.
Thank you for saying that.
That's good enough.
You don't have a CI.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't I have a CI? Yeah.
Gil, maybe one sentence on build, and then we'll continue to the next.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, because there's no real solution for monorepo CI, I built one, and it's called Build. You can look for it, GitHub/Gil Tayar.
It's open source.
It's open source /build.
Okay.
I'm finishing the touches right now, writing a website and everything, but it's basically complete and using it in Applitools. Woo!
Yeah. All right. This is a call for code, not a call for papers. It's a call for code. If anyone wants to contribute and visit Gil's repo for build, and just make him busy now. All right, reaching the end.
Can you have a link in the chat?
This is the time for and you have a link on the chat.
Oh, thank you. Any questions? No questions. Perfect.
Awesome. Daniel, do you want to, we're thanking everyone for joining. It was a pleasure. And Daniel, do you want to wrap it up or?
Yep. Thank you very much for coming. I really like the vibe and the chemistry you three guys had. And I really like how you had like a little bit of different experience and maybe opinions. And I think that really helps us because I don't think there's always a right way. It's just the right way for the way for how it fits for your project. And I really, really, really enjoyed it. And you guys talked about testing in production and Canary. In a few weeks, we might have one talk about testing in production. So yeah, that would be interesting. It's gonna connect a lot of the things that you guys mentioned. And thank you very much for joining.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
I'm sharing now in the chat my CICD tools that I promised. So wanna take it from the chat.
Yoni, put it also on the meetup group. That way everyone will also get
better idea
about it.
Yeah, as a comment in the meetup because it stays there for a longer period.
Sure thing.
All right, bye everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Daniel.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Yoni.